Hey guys, what's up? This is Uri for Guerrilla Poker. This video I'm gonna look at a hand where I ran a pretty big bluff, do a PioSOLVER analysis, and we'll see what we can learn from the analysis about the bluff. Was it good? Was it bad? Is there anything else we should know about this situation? And we'll see, of course, if the bluff was successful or not. I hope you guys enjoy watching the video. This hand starts at a 9-handed table. I opened 4-5 suited from UTG +1, which is certainly a very loose open, and I only make these loose opens in table conditions with multiple recreational players. Generally, as there are more recreational players, you have more reads and more of a handle on how they play. You can widen your pre-flop opening range. And this tends to create an interesting dynamic where here I get 3-bet by the button, and generally my range isn't even supposed to have 4-5 suited. I shouldn't even have it. Should I be calling it or not? And it's a really interesting question. On the one hand, does this guy know I'm opening wider? It's not like a big mystery that people widen their range with recreational players around, so maybe he's 3-betting wider. But even ignoring that, just the fact that this hand isn't in my range has like a large added benefit for post-flop, where hands that this board will hit, he'll never see it coming. So when you have something that's kind of close to calling or folding, but it's not supposed to be in your range, like a suited connector you shouldn't have opened, or a pocket pair you shouldn't have opened, like if I somehow open deuces here, which I'm not supposed to, I'd certainly recommend calling the 3-bet, because the other player's strategy will often, if he's a good player, take into account that you never have deuces, and then deuces becomes kind of like a joker. It's extra good. So call 4-5 suited, 10-8-4 rainbow board. I check, villain bets almost 40% pot, and I decide to go for a small check raise. Villain calls, get a 9 of hearts turn. I bet turn small, he calls, rivers the king of hearts, and I shove. Now, before we look at PioSOLVER, I want to walk you guys through my thought process during the hand. So, back on the flop, facing a small bet, small bets are generally range bets. When people bet with their entire range or close to it, on a 10-high board, they're going to have a lot of unpaired overcards, such as ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen. My small raise is actually, rather than just being a bluff, it's a lot about equity denial. Enough of villain's range is going to be unpaired hands, and raising a kind of merged range like this, where I'm not just raising draws and nuts, but raising pairs, is just going to force him to lose all his EV with a hand like ace-king offsuit, which he has here every time, presumably. So that's the purpose of the flop raise for me. And then when I see the 9 of hearts turn, he should still have all the overcards with a backdoor flush draw. I still want to deny equity a bit from those, so I make this small bet thinking of those. I also know 9 is a good card for me, and in this sense, maybe I should actually bet bigger, because if you think about hands like ace-queen has a gut shot here, so this is a bit too small to actually deny enough equity. So this bet might be, in practice, a bit too small, and more the kind of bet I would like to take if the turn were almost any other card but a 9, like a deuce, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. When I get called and I get the king of hearts, this is certainly a card that takes the showdown value of my hand down to almost 0. Of course, I could still showdown and win against like ace-queen of diamonds, ace-jack of diamonds, but those will certainly bluff if I check. So at this point, it's a question of, do I want to bluff or not? I think the run out came pretty good for my range for bluffing, with a lot of draws getting there, so I decided to bluff. So I put 6 max button versus UTG 3-bet ranges. I don't have 9 max ranges, but that's probably a bit similar to how I'm playing this spot, given I opened 4-5 suited, and potentially similar to how the other player is 3-betting. So I check with a small bet. We can see 88% betting, so almost everything. Versus the check, I am supposed to check raise 22% of the time for this small sizing, with a lot of protection-oriented hands, such as 6s, 7s, 9s, 10-9, which are hands that are clearly not going for stacks, but more for equity denial. But 4-5 suited is never there, and 5s is never there, and ace-4 is never there. If you look at EV, check raising a hand like 4-5 is almost a one big blind mistake. First question I want to ask is, what did I get wrong in this analysis? Because clearly the idea of going for a small check raise for protection is fine, but for some reason you need to have a bit of a higher pair. Like always, you want to look at villain's response to kind of understand. And the way these ranges are configured, how high my pair is really matters, because villain doesn't have just jacks, queens, kings, aces, and overcards. He is going to have some low frequency of 4s or low pocket pairs. When I check raise small, all these hands are calling me. So 4-5 check raising is getting called by a bunch of better pairs, while as my pair gets higher, such as 7s or 9s or 10-9, it's actually getting some value from the pair regen. So given I can't raise every single pair in my range for protection, I have to be a bit picky. 7s enjoys making the pot a bit bigger a lot more than something like 4-5 or pocket 5s. Something to keep in mind for future check raising with low pairs, where on these boards, if you're going for the pairs, you want to have them a bit higher. Going to the turn, look at the 9 of hearts turn, and first thing we can see here is that as far as sizing, and this sim I don't have every sizing option possible, but the more common sizing is to go half pot, and this is what I was talking about, where, you know, if we talk about villain's range, half pot is going to make him fold with hands like ace queen, or lose most of his equity with some hands like ace-jack. I think what we're seeing mainly here is that the 9 improves our range enough, whereas had this been the deuce of hearts, presumably we would see hands like 6s and 7s doing a lot more checking or small betting when they do bet 6s, 7s, 9s, where then they're going for protection to deny equity from the ace-king high type of hands, whereas on the 9, like we see 10-9 is going for value, 9s is for value suddenly, and then these hands go for protection a lot less and bluff a lot more. We can see that the 9 is actually the best card for the out of position player in the deck, followed by the 10, and followed by a 6, probably connected to us check raising pocket 6s sometimes. Given this, the 9 plays differently than most of the other cards, and this is something I messed up in game, so kind of second mistake. Even if like I shouldn't have 4-5, and were I to have 4-5, betting it small most of the time would be okay. But I for sure kind of misunderstood the spot as I was playing. It's more of a big bet spot. So let's go to the river analysis. And at this point, we already know that even if the river were not the king of hearts, I might want to bet big often. But had I bet small, you know, and the river is a deuce, presumably 6s and 7s and 9s and 4-5, if it were here, would all check. And we would hope to sometimes show down against some high card hands, and if villain shoved, probably have to fold. So not the best situation. Like we said, this has to do with the 9. If it went rather than this deuce, we quarter pot, get called, and then it comes like a 6. Again, we check, and if villain shoves, we could actually now bluff catch with 7s or 6-7 or 4-5 almost sometimes. But back to the hand. Our quarter pot, we get to the king of hearts river. At this point, I should be shoving almost all my bluffs. When you look at my kind of hands that can't win, there are a few like ace-jack, ace-queen give-ups, but 7s and 6s and 6-5, and certainly if we get here with 4-5, these hands do a really good job as bluff shoves, which is what I decided to do. Whether the bluff is going to overperform or underperform, you'd have to have a lot of information about what villain does and how he perceives this spot. If he doesn't think you can even get here with a hand like 7s or 4-5, it's very easy for the in-position player to just think, you know, wow, it's almost impossible for the other player to have bluffs. If I were check raising the kind of classic range of sets and draws, I would have, you know, almost zero bluffing combos here because tons of draws got there. But the second I get a bit more flexible, like PioSOLVER with a check raise range, where I could be check raising ace-jack and ace-queen and barrel them, or 7s and 6s and barrel them, it gets a lot easier for me to have bluffs on any run out, and that means that when I shove the river, villain is going to be indifferent with a bunch of bluff catchers. And we can see here how hands like jacks with a heart or aces with a heart or ace 10 are all mixed frequency calls. In PioSolver, you can always make it calculate a node a bit more accurately. And then we just see how aces is roughly 0 EV to call, queens is close to 0 EV, ace 10 is close to 0 EV, and these spots get really, really good if you think your opponent is gonna just fold all of these bluff catchers. So I think they're kind of cool bluffs to pick up on. So went all in on the river. Hopes are up, hearts beating, poker faces on. Nobody can know what we're feeling. And got snap called by the nuts. Whenever I get called by the nuts when I'm running a big bluff, I never feel bad, because obviously no bluff is going to work every single time. I only really feel bad if the other guy snap called me with one of the hands that's a difficult call, and then I understand that for some reason this bluff in this situation against this player was bad. So I don't feel too bad about 4-5 other than losing the $2,000, but certainly I misplayed and misunderstood the situation. Hopefully we all learned something along the way that we'll be able to apply next time and make the entire line more efficient. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.